Let's start with a question that might sound strange at first. Would you want to date yourself or someone like you? Not in a narcissistic way and not in some abstract hypothetical scenario, but for real. Like if the version of you right now walked into your life as a potential partner, would you feel safe or curious or drawn in? Would you feel inspired or would you pause and hesitate? That question isn't meant to shame, it's meant to guide, because somewhere along the way, a lot of men were taught to pursue love by focusing on how to impress and how to win, how to attract, but few were ever asked to look inward and ask, am I the kind of person worth loving? Not for what I have, but for who I am. So that's where integrity comes in. Not as a moral checkbox, not as a nice guy branding strategy, but as the most magnetic, grounding, deeply human form of attraction that you could ever cultivate, especially in yourself. Integrity is this. Integrity is that alignment of your internal values with your external actions. It's being who you say you are, and it's doing what you say you'll do, especially when no one's noticing. It's choosing honesty, even when it costs you something. It's holding your ground, especially when it's easier to pretend. And here's the secret that most dating advice skips. People can feel when you're out of alignment. They might not have the words for it per se, but they can, in some sense, feel the dissonance. So you say you're confident, but you're anxious for validation. You may say that you want intimacy, but you only offer performance. You may say that you're emotionally available, but instead you disappear the moment that vulnerability is required. And that's not because you're broken. It's actually because somewhere along the way, you learned to act lovable instead of actually becoming someone who knows that they are lovable. So let's just slow down a moment here. Attraction, like deep, lasting attraction, is not about games. It's about resonance. It's about the invisible yes that when someone feels like, or when they sense that you're not pretending. It's that form of kindness that isn't a tactic. It's your attention not being a transaction. It's like your words aren't scripted. It's what integrity creates, and that's safety. And safety, I like saying, is sexy. We live in a culture that idolizes swagger and dominance and aesthetics. But the people we want to build real lives with, people who can meet us in our depths, they're drawn to something far rarer, and that is consistency. Not perfection, not performative vulnerability, but the kind of inner coherence that says, this is who I am, and I'm not bending myself to be picked or chosen by others. Because when a man is grounded in his own values, something happens. He stops chasing approval, and he stops shape-shifting. He stops trying to be chosen by everyone, and instead he becomes selective about who he wants to let into his life. That's where the turning point is. And it's deeply attractive. But let's be honest, this is hard work. Integrity requires self-examination. It demands that you stop outsourcing your worth to other people's attention. It calls you to clean up the spaces in your life where you've been faking it and where you're acting lovingly, but secretly you're bitter, where you're showing up with charm, but you're hiding your shame. Integrity asks for your wholeness, and wholeness doesn't mean anything when it's hidden. That doesn't mean spilling your guts to everyone you meet. Instead, it means you know what's going on inside of you. And you're not afraid to bring that self forward. Now, here's the part that gets missed in most conversations about attraction. And that is you become magnetic to the degree that you stop abandoning yourself. I mean, think about that. When you're in a room, are you present or are you performing? When someone shows interest in you, do you feel grounded or do you panic? When rejection happens, do you spiral into shame or do you stay rooted in your dignity? See, your answers to these questions reveal your alignment. And alignment is everything. Because people don't just fall in love with your body, or they don't fall in love with your wit, or just because of the job you have, or the vibe that you're creating. They fall in love with how safe they feel when they're around you, with how seen they feel in your presence and how safe it is to show that part of themselves, with how whole you've become without needing them to complete you. That's why this isn't about becoming perfect. It's instead about becoming trustworthy. Trustworthy first to yourself, and then to others. I want to unpack a little bit about what it looks like to cultivate integrity in practical and relationally transformative ways. I want to even also talk more about how to build your life that you're proud of, where you don't have to fake your confidence, but you can make peace with the parts of you that felt unworthy for a long season. Because becoming the man that you want to love isn't about proving that you deserve love. It's instead about embodying the truth that you already do, and letting that truth shape how you show up in every room, and every relationship, and every moment. So let's begin where it matters most. And that's not with charisma or tactics or image or showing oneself that way. It begins with the inner landscape where you build your true life on. Integrity isn't a surface polish, it's a structural foundation. And many men struggle to form meaningful, secure connections, not because they're lacking in charm or intelligence, it's because instead they've lived with a cracked foundation. And the cracks are showing up when your actions are betraying your values. When you say you want closeness, but then you ghost when it feels too intense or too personal. When you say you respect women, but then you resent them when you feel unseen in their midst. When you claim to be authentic, but only reveal the parts of yourself that you think will get you picked. Integrity requires ruthless honesty. First, like we said, with yourself. So here are a couple of questions to consider that can act like a mirror. Where in my life am I pretending? What do I say I want but keep pushing away when it gets too close? Or where am I hoping that someone else is going to validate me instead of me validating myself? These aren't soft questions, these are disruptive questions, and they have to be, because if you've been outsourcing your sense of worth to being liked or wanted or desired, it's going to feel disorienting to stop chasing and to start aligning. But alignment is the beginning of real attraction. So let's break this down into something a bit more practical, shall we? Here are 5 pillars of integrity that form the core of magnetic presence. Number 1, emotional ownership. This means taking responsibility for your internal world, your reactions, your triggers, your needs. And in essence, you're not blaming others for your emotions, and you don't guilt others into staying. You don't collapse into victimhood when life feels hard. Instead, you say, this is my work that I have to work through, and I'm going to apply myself to this work. That level of self-accountability is rare, and it's deeply attractive. Secondly, honesty without cruelty. Integrity doesn't mean saying everything that you're thinking. Instead, it means saying what's true with care and clarity. You don't manipulate with silence. You don't weaponize truth to punish. Instead, you speak with a voice that's trustworthy because it's consistent and it's clean. See, this is what builds emotional safety. Safety progresses to build connection. And then thirdly is boundaries with compassion. You know what you're available for and what you're not available for. So you don't disappear out of fear or out of a desire to people please, especially when things get discomfort. You say things like, I want to stay connected, and I also need this to feel mutually invested. See, boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations to mutual respect. And then fourthly, it's actions that match your words. So you don't say you'll call and then you vanish. You don't promise emotional safety and then you erupt when you're triggered. You don't declare vulnerability and then punish someone for seeing your soft spots. When your actions match your values, people trust you. And trust is a foundation for attraction that lasts a long spell. And then fifthly, there's self-validation over performance. This is where you don't show up hoping that others are going to convince you that you're worthwhile. You know who you are, and your presence reflects that. And you're not performing, you're not impressing, you're simply being. You're grounded, you're open, and you're being real. And that realness is powerful. Take a moment here. If any of this feels like a stretch, like a version of yourself that you haven't fully stepped into yet, that's not a bad thing. That means you're actually waking up to these realizations. That means you're getting curious, and curiosity is the birthplace of growth. So let's name something clearly, shall we? This is not about becoming lovable so that someone will finally love you. That's the mindset that keeps your worth in someone else's hands. No, this is about becoming someone that you deeply admire yourself. Becoming the kind of man who wakes up in the morning and knows that he is at peace with how he shows up in the world. The kind of man who knows his yes means yes and his no means no. The kind of man who doesn't need to chase attention because he's rooted in something that's deeper than performance. Beneath all this, when you become a man that you want to love, something shifts. You don't walk into a room asking, am I good enough? Instead, you walk in already knowing that you're valuable. And you're simply asking, is this space aligned with who I am? That's the shift from desperation to discernment. That's the shift from hustling, especially for love, to becoming someone that's capable of actually receiving it. And yes, people feel that. They may not articulate it, but they sense it. They lean in because deep down, all of us are looking for something real, something consistent, someone who isn't playing a role, but instead they're embodying a whole life. But let's spend a moment and unpack some myths that men do to keep integrity out. Let's talk a little bit about how the culture that we're in trains men to fake their wholeness instead of becoming whole, and how to walk from that script for good. Because becoming a man that you'd want to love isn't about being better than anyone else. It's Instead, it's about finally becoming yourself fully and unapologetically and with your integrity intact that draws others in, and not through force, but through freedom. Let's maybe consider some of the lies that we have to address. The ones that are handed down through culture and media and locker rooms, and even on some corners of the internet that disguise themselves as manhood, but actually pull you further away from the kind of grounded integrity that makes deep connection possible. Here's one of the biggest lies that we have to consider. It says, to be desirable, you have to be dominant. This shows up in dating advice that tells men to be the alpha male, to always lead, to never show weakness, to take control and to show up in every conversation as the center of attention. But that's not attraction. That's performance rooted in insecurity. Because dominance is not the same as confidence. And control is not the same as connection. Confidence says, I know who I am. Dominance, however, says, I need to prove who I am by overpowering you. True confidence, however, is the kind that's born from integrity, and it doesn't demand submission. Instead, it invites respect, and it creates room for mutuality. You don't have to dominate someone to feel strong. In fact, I would say the strongest men are the ones who can meet you eye to eye, heart to heart, and still stand fully in who they are without shrinking or without towering. Here's another lie that we should consider, and that says, vulnerability makes you weak. You see, many men were taught to keep it locked in. That if you cry, or admit doubts, or ask for help, or share your fears, you're somehow less of a man. And so they armor up. And that armor might win them short-term admiration, but it kills long-term intimacy. Because love requires access. And if no one can access your truth, if no one can access your fears or your wounds, if they can't see who you truly are, then they're not falling in love with you. They're falling in love with the edited version of you, which is a mask or a shell. But when you begin to show up with honesty, not oversharing for attention or not trauma dumping, but showing up with real rooted honesty, we see a shift. You become someone who is safe and relatable. You become someone that doesn't have to hide. You're not pretending anymore. You're not performing. Your wholeness is able to show up in this space and show you who you are, and that is what we call integrity. Another lie that's worth calling out says your value is what in what you can bring or provide. And many men equate their worth with their wallet or their muscles or their car, their job. But the truth is, while those things can be attractive to some people, they can't be substitutes for intimacy. See, providing value is not the same as being emotionally available. Being a provider is not the same as being a partner. You may impress someone with your achievements, but you only build safety when your heart is on display and shows up as well. And make no mistake, safety is what allows someone to stay. So what's the truth beneath all of these lies? I'd say the most attractive men are the men who are most aligned. They know who they are. They own where they're growing and where they're struggling. They're open to sharing that. They walk in self-respect and not in self-promotion. They offer clarity and not confusion. And they hold space, not power, over others. And because of that, people feel drawn to these individuals, not in a desperate chasing way, but in a magnetic, grounded way. Let's make this a bit more tangible. Here are some signs that you're moving from fantasy in the way that you're trying to attract others into an integrity-based kind of a connection. You stop obsessing over being wanted, and instead you start focusing on being worthy of trust. You care about being, so you care less about being impressive, but you care far more about being honest. You're not thrown off by rejection, because you know rejection isn't always personal. It's about alignment and not your worth. You become far more selective with who you pursue because you no longer are trying to prove anything. Instead, you're seeking resonance. And this is the key. The key is that you stop trying to be chosen by everyone because you've finally chosen yourself. You don't have to broadcast your value anymore. Instead, it shows up in how you carry yourself, how you listen, how you respect your boundaries, how you handle silence, how you respond to someone saying no, how you show up without needing applause. See, that is integrity, and it's incredibly attractive. But it's not flashy. It's not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. Instead, it's quiet. It's a quiet kind of a confidence of a man who no longer needs to act lovable because he's living in alignment with who he knows he is. Now, I just want to move towards bringing all this home. See, as we continue this journey of integrity, not as a destination, but as a way of life, we need to discuss how attraction is rooted in alignment and not just connection, but also commitment as well. And I also want to remind you that the love that you're building, doesn't begin with others or who sees you, but it begins with how you see yourself. That's because when you become the man you want to love, it's then that you stop chasing worth. And instead you start embodying it. So, yeah, let's bring this home, shall we? You don't have to become attractive by mastering tactics. You become attractive instead by mastering truthfulness and honesty and vulnerability. And the deepest truth is this: you are already worthy. The question isn't whether someone will finally recognize it. The question instead is whether you're willing to finally stop searching for others who are going to give you validation. Because until you believe you're worth loving, you'll keep on chasing people who only reflect the doubts back to you. You'll keep performing and you'll keep bending, and then you'll collapse the moment that someone doesn't mirror the identity that you haven't fully quite claimed yet. But the man who walks in integrity, well, he doesn't panic when attention fades. He doesn't collapse when someone walks. He doesn't fake confidence just to hold someone's interest. Because he knows that his value isn't up for negotiation at all. That kind of a man is magnetic, not because he has all the answers, but it's because he stopped asking everyone else to define who he is and what his worth is. Let's talk a little bit about what happens when you live this way, because when you become someone you'd want to love, there is a significant way in how you perceive yourself. You stop dating as a test that you have to pass, but instead you start seeing it as a filter. You're not trying to win people over anymore. You're discovering who's truly aligned with my values. And that means rejection stops feeling like failure and instead it starts feeling like clarity. You don't contort yourself into being a palatable shape just to get a chance at connection. Instead, you show up and fully let others decide if that version of you resonates with them, because you're doing the same. And you stop treating love like a scarce commodity. Because here's the quiet truth. When you love yourself in alignment, you attract others who are going to meet you there. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to meet you there. It doesn't mean that every connection will be deep or mutual or even lasting. But it does mean that the people who can love you, they won't have to guess who you are. They'll feel it and they'll trust that feeling. Because you've done the work to become someone who is trustworthy. Not just in how you treat them, but in how you treat yourself as well. And that changes everything. I mean, imagine being someone who's grounded, who doesn't have to pretend to be perfect, but is always real. Imagine being someone who doesn't chase or retreat, but instead engages, who holds boundaries, not to punish, but to protect the relationship, who listens, not to fix, but to understand. Now imagine you being that person. That's what this episode is about. Not just about attracting love, but it's about becoming someone who can actually sustain love. Because here's the thing, love isn't hard to find. It's hard to hold, when you're out of alignment especially. But when you become someone that you'd want to love, your relationships change and your standards shift. Your capacity grows and you move differently. Not with an ego, but with clarity. And you lead with respect and not performance. You invite intimacy and not intensity. And you say things like, I'm not going to fake who I am to be chosen. I'm not here to prove myself. I'm here instead to build something that is real and sustainable. And I'm willing to walk away from what doesn't align with myself, even if it looks good on the surface. Right. And here's what happens next. The world may get louder, trying to pull you back into that hustle. Old wounds may resurface, trying to convince you that you're still not enough. And people, they'll test your growth, asking if you really meant what you said about those boundaries or about your honesty and your alignments. And that's okay. That's part of it. You see, integrity doesn't mean you never waver. It means instead that you return again and again to who you say that you are. And that returning, that's what makes you magnetic. There's a consistency there because people worth building love with aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for someone who's present, for someone who tells the truth, for someone who doesn't vanish in conflict. They're looking for someone whose life reflects their values. They're looking for someone who feels like home. And that doesn't start with them, it starts with you. And so if you've spent years wondering why you're not attracting the right kind of love, the one that you crave, don't shame yourself right away. Don't jump to the tactics that you once tried. Start here by asking, who am I presently becoming? Am I someone that I would trust? Am I someone that I would respect? Am I someone that I could hold another person's heart without dropping my own? These are the questions that will shape your future. Because when you become the man that you'd want to love, you don't have to force connection. Instead, you become that kind of connection that others are drawn to. You carry it in your words, you embody it in your actions, you reflect it in your choices, and eventually, the world begins to mirror it back. It doesn't always happen, and not immediately, not predictably, but inevitably, because love is drawn to alignment. So let me leave you with this. You are not waiting to become worthy. You are uncovering the worth that has been buried under layers for years. And every time you choose integrity, that worth begins to resurface. And you don't need a script to be loved. What you need is to be honest. You don't need to dominate the room. You instead need to belong to yourself and see your worth already. You don't need to chase attraction. You just need to become it through alignment and integrity and through presence. That's the hard work. But that's the call, that's the challenge, that's the invitation. And that's the kind of man that the world and real love has been waiting for. And it's yours for the taking.